The sound came first, a dull, hollow thud as metal struck earth, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably final. Somewhere deep in the woods, far from paved roads and curious eyes, a shovel cut into damp soil under the glow of flashing patrol lights filtered through trees. A woman lay on the ground, wrists burning, lungs tight with panic, as voices above her spoke in low, confident tones. These weren't the frantic sounds of officers responding to danger. They were calm, casual, certain. Certain that no one was coming. Certain that what they were about to do would disappear with the forest by morning. Welcome to Swift Tale, where power, corruption, and justice collide in stories that refuse to stay buried. And if this is your first time here, let me ask you a quick question before we go any further. Do you enjoy true-style stories where evil almost wins, but doesn't? If so, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves intense storytelling, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Tonight's story is not easy to hear, but it's impossible to forget. It begins with a woman who expected to go home that night and instead found herself driven off the road, stripped of her voice, and taken into the woods by the very people sworn to protect her. What she didn't know, what the corrupt officers digging her grave never imagined, was that they were not alone. Somewhere in the shadows, trained eyes were watching. A Navy SEAL, hardened by combat and guided by instinct, stood still with his dog at his side, witnessing something that instantly told him this was no lawful arrest. This was an execution. Stories like this matter because they expose a terrifying truth. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from criminals hiding in the dark, but from authority figures who believe the dark belongs to them. This isn't just a story about survival, it's about how power can rot when unchecked, how silence can become a weapon, and how justice can arrive from the most unexpected place, led not by sirens or commands, but by instinct, courage, and a refusal to look away. As this story unfolds, you'll see how a routine encounter spirals into a nightmare, how confidence turns into cruelty when people believe they're untouchable, and how one decision, to watch instead of walk away, changes everything. Because while some people use the woods to hide their crimes, others use them to protect what's right. And tonight, deep beneath the trees, those two forces were about to collide. So stay with me, because what happened next would not only save a life, it would expose a truth the corrupt never saw coming. This is Swift Tale, and this is the night the hunters became the hunted. Before the forest, before the flashing lights, and long before the shovels hit the dirt, she was simply a woman living her life, defined not by fear but by resilience. Her routine had always been precise, punctual, cautious, yet confident. She wasn't naive. She had learned early on that the world could be cruel, and that authority didn't always equal protection. Her instincts were honed by years of navigating complex, high-pressure situations, allowing her to stay calm when chaos erupted around her. Friends and colleagues often described her as composed, almost unshakable, the kind of person whose quiet strength radiated without needing validation. But beneath that composed exterior was a person shaped by experience, aware of both her vulnerabilities and her power. She knew how to read people, detect unspoken intentions, and respond without overreacting, skills that would prove crucial on the night that changed everything. Her life had been marked by small battles, moments of standing firm against unfair treatment, moments of questioning but never yielding to intimidation. These experiences had cultivated a mental toughness that few could see, but everyone would soon witness in action. She wasn't defined by the badge she carried or the authority it symbolized. She was defined by her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it placed her in danger. Every decision she had made in her life had led her to this precise moment, the moment where vigilance, patience, and resilience would be the difference between life and death. She had faced challenges before, but nothing could have prepared her for the darkness that awaited in the woods, where those who were sworn to uphold the law would attempt to silence her forever. In understanding her, we begin to understand why this story matters. It isn't just about survival, it's about the quiet, relentless courage that ordinary people carry and how that courage can confront the extraordinary cruelty of those who abuse power. The woman behind the courage is not just a victim or a survivor. She is a testament to the strength that comes from experience, awareness, and an unbreakable will. It started the way so many stories like this always do, with flashing lights in the rearview mirror and a sinking feeling that something wasn't right. She pulled over where she was told, engine idling, hands visible, every movement careful. The road was narrow, bordered by trees that swallowed sound and light, and the patrol car behind her sat just a little too close. When the officers approached, there was no greeting, no explanation, just a long, measuring look that lingered longer than necessary. From the very first exchange, their tone carried an edge that had nothing to do with procedure and everything to do with control. They asked routine questions, but the way they asked them felt rehearsed, almost bored. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why are you out here this late? Each answer she gave seemed to irritate them, not because it was wrong, but because it didn't give them what they wanted. One officer circled the car slowly, shining his light inside as if searching for an excuse rather than evidence. Another leaned too close to her window, invading space, lowering his voice as if the darkness itself was on their side. She noticed how they spoke to each other, short glances, half smiles, unspoken signals that suggested this stop had already moved beyond anything official. When she asked why she was being detained, the response wasn't an answer, it was a warning. Her questions were met with impatience, her calm labeled as attitude. One officer claimed there was an issue with her vehicle. Another contradicted him seconds later. Small inconsistencies piled up quickly, the kind that only appear when rules are being bent in real time. She realized then that this wasn't about a traffic violation at all. This was about leverage. About seeing how far they could push before she pushed back. The air changed the moment she reached for her phone, not aggressively, just enough to signal that she wanted someone to know where she was. The reaction was immediate. Voices sharpened. Commands came faster. One officer told her to step out of the vehicle while the other positioned himself behind her, too close, too ready. She complied, heart pounding, instinct screaming that something had gone terribly wrong. The road felt suddenly empty, the trees taller, the night heavier. No passing cars, no witnesses, just uniforms, authority, and a growing sense that the rules protecting her no longer applied. As they moved her away from her car, she noticed how quickly the narrative changed. Now she was uncooperative. Now she was suspicious. Each label came effortlessly, as if they'd practiced this transformation before, turning a compliant citizen into a problem that needed to be handled. She tried to steady her breathing, to remember details, faces, words. Somewhere deep inside, a realization settled in with terrifying clarity. This traffic stop was never meant to end on the roadside. And as the patrol car door opened, not for her to sit inside safely, but to be taken somewhere else, the last illusion of routine vanished. This wasn't a misunderstanding waiting to be cleared up. It was the moment the line was crossed, when authority shed its mask and something far more dangerous stepped forward. The moment she was placed in the back of the patrol car, the world narrowed to hard plastic seats and the dull click of a closing door. The sound echoed louder than it should have, sealing her inside a space that felt less like protection and more like a cage. As the car pulled away, she looked through the rear window and watched her own vehicle disappear into the darkness, swallowed by trees and distance. No explanation followed, no radio call announcing a destination, just the steady hum of tires leaving the main road, turning onto paths that felt increasingly wrong. The paved surface gave way to gravel, then dirt. Every turn pulled them farther from anything familiar. Streetlights vanished. Phone signal bars dropped one by one until the screen went dark. She tried to mark time by counting breaths, by listening for sounds, another car, a voice on the radio, anything normal, but there was nothing. The officers in the front spoke in low tones, casual and unhurried, as if this were a drive they'd taken many times before. The calm frightened her more than shouting ever could. She asked where they were taking her. The question hung unanswered. When she pressed again, one of them glanced back briefly, eyes cold, and told her to relax. Another muttered that she should have thought about consequences earlier. Consequences for what, she wondered, as her pulse thudded in her ears. There had been no citation, no arrest explained, no rights read, just movement, forward, deeper away. Every law she knew told her this was wrong, but laws mean little when the people breaking them are the ones meant to enforce them. The woods closed in as the car slowed, branches scraping lightly along the sides like fingers testing the metal. When the engine finally stopped, the silence was absolute. No traffic, no wind, just trees towering overhead and darkness thick enough to feel. The officers stepped out first, their silhouettes moving with an ease that suggested familiarity. This wasn't a place they'd stumbled upon. This was somewhere they knew. When they opened her door, the air outside was colder, heavier. She was told to step out, and she did, legs unsteady, mind racing. The ground beneath her shoes was uneven, soft in places, as if it had been disturbed before. Flashlights cut narrow paths through the darkness, never fully revealing what lay beyond. One officer positioned himself behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence without seeing his face. Another stood in front, blocking the only visible path back. In that moment, the truth settled in, not all at once, but slowly, like the weight of the earth itself. This wasn't about paperwork. This wasn't about intimidation to teach a lesson. This was isolation by design. Whatever was about to happen here was meant to be unseen, unheard, and unchallenged. And as the trees stood silent witnesses, she realized with chilling clarity that being taken off the road had never been a detour. It was the destination. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden shift in tone. Instead, the truth revealed itself in fragments, careless words, confident laughter, the absence of urgency that only comes when people believe they are completely beyond consequence. One of the officers kicked at the dirt with his boot, glancing around the clearing as if checking off a mental list. Another spoke into his radio briefly, not to report an arrest, but to establish silence. No call signs, no timestamps, no record. In that quiet exchange, the last illusion of legitimacy fell away. Their conversation changed. Procedure disappeared. They no longer spoke to her, but about her, as though she were already reduced to a problem to be solved rather than a person standing a few feet away. One officer complained about how things used to be easier. Another joked that people asked too many questions now. Their words weren't angry, they were irritated, inconvenienced by a world that no longer allowed them to do whatever they wanted without scrutiny. It was in that irritation that the depth of their corruption showed itself. She listened carefully, forcing herself to stay present despite the fear pressing in on her chest. They talked like men who had done this before, not necessarily the same act, but the same pattern: isolate, intimidate, erase. One of them mentioned a close call from years back, laughing it off as bad luck. Another dismissed internal reviews as paperwork that never led anywhere. Every sentence confirmed what her instincts already knew. These weren't officers who had made a terrible mistake. These were officers who had grown comfortable crossing lines because no one had stopped them. What chilled her most wasn't the cruelty, it was the confidence. They moved without hesitation, without disagreement, each one knowing his role. This wasn't chaos, it was coordination, the kind built over time, reinforced by shared silence and mutual protection. In that moment, she understood that whatever they were planning had nothing to do with her personally. She was simply the next variable in a system that had been rotting quietly for years. One of them finally looked at her directly and said something that stripped away any remaining doubt. "No one comes out here," he said flatly, gesturing to the trees. "That's the point." There was no threat in his voice, just a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who believed the environment itself was an accomplice. The woods weren't just a location, they were a shield, a place where actions could vanish as completely as footprints after rain. In that instant, she realized the danger wasn't just what they intended to do, it was how easily they believed they could get away with it. Badges had taught them that authority was absolute, that uniforms were protection not just from criminals, but from accountability. And as they turned their attention back to the ground, speaking casually about what came next, the final truth became unmistakable. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was corruption laid bare, methodical, practiced, and convinced it would never see the light. The first shovelful of dirt landed close enough for her to feel it, not on her body, but in her chest, as if the sound itself had weight. It was slow at first, almost ceremonial, the metal biting into the ground with a rhythm that suggested patience. No rush, no panic. The officers moved with the confidence of men who believed time was on their side. Flashlights swept the clearing, briefly illuminating her face before turning back to the earth, as though acknowledging her only made the task more uncomfortable. They forced her down, not violently at first, but firmly, methodically, pressing her into the shallow pit they had already started shaping. The soil was cold and damp beneath her palms. She tried to speak, to reason, to remind them of cameras, of families, of consequences, but her words dissolved into the trees. One of them told her to save her breath. Another said nothing at all, focused only on the work. Dirt began to fall closer now, brushing her clothes, slipping into her hair. Each sound of impact echoed louder in her mind than the last. Panic surged, sharp and overwhelming, but she fought to control it. She had to breathe, had to think. Every instinct screamed to thrash, to fight, but she knew how quickly strength could be wasted. She focused instead on staying conscious, on keeping her chest clear, on small movements that might buy her time. The officers talked while they worked, about shifts, about overtime, about how quiet the woods were this time of night. Their casual conversation made everything feel unreal, like a nightmare stitched together from ordinary words and unimaginable actions. As more dirt fell, the world narrowed. The sky became a thin strip above her, framed by branches and silhouettes. Her breaths grew shorter, heavier, each one carrying the fear that the next might not come. She could feel the pressure building, not just from the soil, but from the realization that this was happening because they believed they could make her disappear. No report, no witness, no trace, just another missing person swallowed by the forest. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into something endless, measured only by the sound of shovels and the weight pressing closer. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but to hold onto something, memories, faces, the certainty that she was more than this moment. Somewhere deep inside, a fragile thread of hope refused to break, not because she believed rescue was coming, but because letting go felt like giving them exactly what they wanted. And then, just as the darkness threatened to close completely, something changed. A sound, faint, distant, unfamiliar, cut through the steady rhythm of digging. It was subtle enough that the officers didn't notice at first, but it was real. And in that single interruption, buried beneath fear and soil, the possibility of survival stirred. The weight increased slowly, inch by inch, as if the earth itself were deciding how much she could endure. Dirt slid down the sides of the pit, packing in around her legs and hips, cold and heavy, stealing movement first, then leverage. Every breath became a calculation, inhale shallow enough to keep the soil from shifting, exhale controlled so panic didn't take over. She focused on small details to stay present. The smell of damp leaves, the grit between her fingers, the way the night air felt thinner with every passing moment. The officers' voices drifted in and out, sometimes close, sometimes distant, as they took turns with the shovel. One complained about the ground being harder than expected. Another joked that the forest always made things look deeper than they were. Their words carried no urgency, no doubt, only the confidence of men who believed the world beyond the trees had already forgotten this place. That certainty was what terrified her most. It wasn't rage driving them. It was routine. She shifted slightly, just enough to create a pocket of space near her chest, fighting the instinct to gasp. Training she never knew she had took over. Stay calm, conserve air, don't waste strength. Fear came in waves, sharp and blinding, but she forced herself to ride each one without giving in. Somewhere in the chaos of her thoughts, she held onto a single truth. As long as she could think, she could survive. As long as she could breathe, this wasn't over. More dirt fell, muffling sound, turning the world into something distant and unreal. The officers' movements slowed, their conversation tapering off as the task neared completion. The sky above her narrowed to a sliver, then to shadows, then to nothing at all. Darkness pressed in, not just around her, but inside her thoughts, threatening to erase time, to make surrender feel inevitable. She clenched her jaw and focused on counting heartbeats, anchoring herself to the rhythm of being alive. Then it happened again, that sound, not close, not loud, but unmistakably different from the scrape of metal and the shift of soil. A low noise, brief but alert, followed by another, sharper this time. The officers paused. One of them straightened, scanning the trees. Another tilted his head, listening. For a moment, no one moved. The forest, which had felt complicit in her disappearance, suddenly felt watchful. Buried beneath layers of earth and fear, she didn't know what the sound meant. She only knew it wasn't supposed to be there. And in that fragile pause, when shovels stopped and silence returned, hope flickered again, small but stubborn, refusing to be buried with her. Somewhere in the shadows, beyond the reach of the officers' flashlights, a figure moved with the patience and precision of someone trained to notice what others missed. A Navy SEAL, hardened by years of missions where mistakes meant death, had been tracking more than just the quiet of the forest that night. Beside him, a dog, alert, disciplined, and sensitive to even the slightest shift in air or sound, paused, ears twitching, tail stiff. They had been on a routine patrol, testing terrain and endurance, but instinct had pulled them toward something darker. something unnatural, something that didn't belong. He observed silently, scanning the clearing, counting the shapes, the movements, the way light hit faces. His military mind catalogued everything: numbers, spacing, patterns, and posture. Nothing about the scene felt lawful. Nothing about the tension in the air suggested this was an ordinary stop or roadside investigation. Something was very wrong. The dog sniffed the wind, growling softly, an instinctive warning that confirmed what his eyes had already seen. The woman on the ground was in danger, real, immediate danger, and the people around her weren't officers carrying out justice. They were predators confident that no one would intervene. Stayed downwind, careful not to alert them to his presence, but his mind raced through scenarios, calculating distance, timing, and risk. Every seal is trained to move with both patience and precision, and he knew the value of waiting for the right moment. Too soon and the woman could be harmed. Too late and opportunity would vanish. He watched as the shovels struck earth, as dirt fell near her, and as the perpetrators showed the same confidence that only comes from believing they are untouchable. Confidence that would soon become their undoing. The dog's growl rose again, low and insistent, and he realized this wasn't just instinct, it was a signal. The animal had detected stress, fear, and the human scent of someone being forcibly restrained. Together they were a team finely attuned to danger that lurked beneath the surface. And in that moment, he knew the rules of engagement were simple: observe, plan, and act decisively when the time came. Hesitation was a luxury they couldn't afford, and yet patience was their greatest weapon. Hidden in the trees, the seal understood the stakes as clearly as the officers did not. Every second counted. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the night could end in tragedy. But he also knew that advantage was on his side. They were visible only to him, predictable in their arrogance, unaware of the witness who had the training to read their every motion. Somewhere in the darkness, hope stirred, not for the forest, not for the perpetrators, but for the woman whose life hung in the balance. And as the clearing stretched before him, he prepared silently and deliberately to intervene. The first bark was low, almost a warning, a vibration that ran through the stillness of the woods like an alarm. The dog crouched, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the clearing where the officers worked, shovels cutting into the earth, movements confident and casual. It wasn't a random noise. It was a signal, a message carried on instincts honed for survival, for sensing danger before humans even realize it exists. The seal watched intently, heart steady, knowing that every reaction of the animal was a clue to the danger he had already sensed. This wasn't an ordinary alert, it was a countdown. Something was about to happen. The officers didn't notice. They laughed among themselves, moving methodically, absorbed in the task at hand, unaware that their every gesture was being observed by two beings trained to detect even the slightest deviation from the expected. The dog barked again, sharper this time, and shifted slightly to maintain a line of sight toward the pit where she lay, half covered in dirt. Its growl followed, low and guttural, carrying authority that made the seal smirk silently. These predators had no idea they were being watched. Every instinct told the seal that hesitation could cost lives. He adjusted his position, making sure he remained unseen, while simultaneously noting the layout of the terrain, the angles of exposure, the safest paths for approach. His mind catalogued each movement, each shovel strike, each careless glance, the same way he had learned to chart enemy positions in combat zones. And all the while, the dog maintained its vigil, ears forward, hackles raised, tail rigid, a silent partner in an operation that hadn't yet officially begun. Then came the subtle shift he had been waiting for. One officer bent too far, unbalanced, concentrating entirely on the dirt, while another glanced upward, confident that no one could possibly see them. That moment of overconfidence was enough. The dog barked again, louder, closer, a warning with teeth behind it. The officers froze for a heartbeat, scanning the shadows, but they couldn't identify the source. The sound wasn't coming from the woman. They didn't even realize it was coming from the forest itself. It was the dog, alerting its human partner, signaling that the time to act was approaching. The seal exhaled slowly, calming his own pulse. He had seen this instinct before, countless times in training, countless times in operations. When the animal senses something the human eye cannot, that is when you know danger is real and imminent. The dog's unwavering focus confirmed it. These officers were predators in their own right, but tonight, their prey was not alone. And as the bark reverberated through the trees, the seal prepared to turn observation into action, knowing that the moment of intervention was coming, and that it would have to be precise, swift, and decisive. The moment had arrived. The seal moved with the silent precision of someone who had trained for situations far deadlier than this, each step calculated, deliberate, unseen. The dog stayed close, a shadow beside him, ears alert, eyes tracking every subtle movement in the clearing. From their vantage point, the officers were oblivious, so certain in their control that they hadn't even noticed the danger watching them from the edge of the trees, and that overconfidence would be their undoing. A sharp, controlled whistle from the seal triggered the dog into action. It darted forward, teeth bared, barking aggressively, a blur of speed and sound that caused the first officer to stumble back, startled. The other officer swung his flashlight in all directions, searching for the source, but it was too late. The seal emerged from cover, moving with authority, his voice calm but commanding. "Step away from her," he said, the words carrying the weight of someone trained to be obeyed. There was no hesitation, no questioning of authority, only immediate recognition that the situation had flipped. Chaos erupted. The officers had never encountered resistance like this. They tried to shout to assert control, but the combination of precision, tactical awareness, and the dog's relentless presence left them off balance. The seal advanced steadily, covering the woman as she pushed herself up from the dirt, coughing, shaking, but alive. Every motion he made was deliberate, one hand on the dog, another keeping the aggressors at bay. His eyes scanned constantly, aware of potential threats from shadows, from movement in the trees. He was a trained observer, a predator in his own right, and these officers were prey for the first time in their lives. The woman's fear began to dissipate as she realized she was no longer alone, no longer at the mercy of men who had believed themselves untouchable. The seal guided her out of the pit, shielding her as the dog's growl forced the officers back further, instilling a fear they hadn't expected. For the first time, they were forced to confront that their actions had consequences, that the forest they had counted on as a shield now exposed them instead. Within moments, the situation had shifted completely. Moments like these matter because they illustrate the balance between fear and action, between chaos and control. The officers believed their power was absolute, that isolation in the woods could erase the consequences of their crimes, yet the very assumption of impunity became their undoing. Courage, whether human or canine, can shift the odds in an instant. It shows us that even in the darkest, most hopeless situations, intervention is possible and hope is never truly gone. For viewers, this story is more than suspense. It's a lesson in awareness, in trusting instincts, and in understanding that actions always have consequences, no matter how hidden they may seem. It challenges assumptions about power, reminds us of the importance of ethics, and affirms that accountability often arrives when it is least expected. It also underscores the incredible bond between humans and animals, a partnership that can become life-saving in critical moments. The aftermath of the rescue unfolded with a rapid, almost cinematic intensity. Federal authorities moved in swiftly once the scene had been secured, taking statements, cataloging evidence, and identifying the officers involved. The corrupt cops, who had spent years believing their positions offered them immunity, were suddenly confronted with the stark reality that every action they had taken had been witnessed, recorded, and meticulously documented. The SEAL's presence and testimony, combined with the dog's role as a key witness to their behavior, left no room for excuses. The arrogance that had guided them through the woods evaporated under the weight of impending. The arrests were precise and coordinated, reflecting the seriousness of the crimes committed. Each officer was read their rights, handcuffed, and led away from the forest clearing that had become both a grave and a stage. Their usual bravado had been replaced with confusion, disbelief, and in some cases, panic. They had underestimated the consequences of their actions, never imagining that someone trained to observe and intervene would be watching and documenting their every move. The SEAL, having ensured the woman's safety, remained a calm presence, providing statements to authorities and clarifying the timeline, every detail critical for the investigation that was about to unfold. News of the arrests spread quickly through law enforcement channels, sending shockwaves among colleagues and supervisors. The officers' reputations, once untouchable in their minds, were now irreversibly tarnished. Internal Affairs opened full-scale investigations into the department, reviewing records, prior complaints, and any other evidence that might connect to a pattern of abuse. The forest clearing that had witnessed a near tragedy became the foundation for justice. The woman, though still processing the terror she had endured, provided her account with clarity, knowing that her testimony, combined with the evidence collected, would ensure the perpetrators faced real consequences. It was a striking reversal of roles. The hunters had become the hunted, and the power that had once seemed absolute was dismantled piece by piece. The arrests served as a stark warning to anyone who believed authority granted impunity. Corruption, no matter how deeply rooted, cannot survive when vigilance, courage, and truth converge. And while the woman's rescue was extraordinary in its timing and execution, the lessons it offered would resonate far beyond the forest, illustrating the importance of accountability, the necessity of intervention, and the undeniable impact of unwavering courage. In the days following the dramatic rescue and arrests, the story began to unfold in ways that shocked both the department and the public. Investigators combed through records, uncovered prior complaints, and interviewed witnesses who had long feared retaliation. Each new piece of evidence revealed a disturbing pattern of misconduct, exposing just how long the corrupt officers had operated under the assumption that no one would ever stop them. What had seemed like an isolated incident, the attempted burial in the woods, was only the tip of a much larger iceberg, a network of abuse and impunity hidden behind badges and protocol. Media outlets quickly picked up the story once the initial investigations were made public, highlighting the audacity and danger of the officers' actions. Headlines screamed about the woman who had been saved from a grave by a Navy SEAL and his dog, and about the swift justice that followed. Public outrage surged as communities demanded answers, accountability, and systemic reforms. The story became a powerful example of how unchecked power can endanger lives, and how courage and vigilance can restore balance. People began to realize that corruption, no matter how entrenched, could not remain hidden forever. Within the department, the revelations prompted a wave of internal scrutiny. Supervisors faced questions about oversight failures, training deficiencies, and why red flags had gone unaddressed for so long. Some officers attempted to downplay the events, but the mounting evidence and the testimony of witnesses, including the SEAL and the woman herself, left little room for denial. The narrative shifted. What had initially been viewed as an isolated encounter was now understood as part of a broader system in need of reform. Those who had relied on silence and intimidation found themselves exposed under the harsh light of truth. The woman, once a victim teetering on the edge of death, became a central figure in the uncovering of corruption. Her account, detailed and composed, highlighted not only the immediate danger she faced, but also the pattern of abuse she had inadvertently stumbled into. As investigations continued, previous complaints were revisited, and past victims were given a voice, creating a ripple effect of accountability. What had begun as a single night of terror became a turning point for an entire department, proving that the truth, once revealed, carries a power no badge or uniform can contain. The courtroom was tense, a space thick with anticipation and unspoken judgment as the trial began. The corrupt officers, once untouchable in their own minds, now faced the full weight of the law. They sat in silence, uniforms irrelevant, their bravado replaced by the unmistakable signs of fear and uncertainty. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically: shovel marks, witness testimony, forensic reports, and the meticulous account provided by the Navy SEAL who had observed the events from the shadows. Every word and every piece of evidence painted a picture of deliberate cruelty and abuse of power that the officers could no longer deny. As the woman recounted the terrifying night, her voice, steady and controlled, cut through the tension in the room. She spoke not just of fear, but of clarity, how she had remained conscious, aware, and determined to survive despite the grave being dug beneath her. Her testimony highlighted not only the immediate danger she faced, but the systematic corruption that had allowed these officers to act with impunity. Every detail, from the initial roadside encounter to the officers' overconfidence in the woods, served as a damning account that left no room for misinterpretation. The SEAL's testimony further sealed the case. He described his observation of the scene with precision and calm authority, explaining how he recognized the danger, monitored the situation, and intervened at the critical moment. His account of the dog's reactions and the tactical decisions made during the rescue added credibility and clarity, leaving the courtroom in no doubt about the sequence of events. The officers, once confident in their control, were now reduced to watching as the narrative they had attempted to bury unfolded with undeniable proof. Witness after witness came forward, and a pattern of misconduct emerged, illustrating that the night in the woods was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader culture of abuse. Legal experts and investigators detailed prior complaints and overlooked violations, making it clear that the justice system was finally addressing the systemic failures that had allowed these officers to operate unchecked. By the time closing arguments were made, the courtroom held a singular, undeniable truth. Arrogance and corruption may allow someone to believe they are untouchable, but evidence, courage, and accountability ensure that justice prevails. And for the woman who had nearly been buried alive, the verdict was more than legal vindication. It was the affirmation of her survival, her resilience, and the unwavering force of truth. In the weeks and months following the courtroom victory, the woman began the long and complex process of healing. The physical and emotional scars left by the ordeal ran deep, reminders of a night when fear had pressed in from every direction. Yet, with each passing day, she reclaimed pieces of herself that had been buried alongside the soil in that woods. Therapy, support from friends and family, and the quiet knowledge that justice had been served became her anchors, helping her rebuild not just a sense of safety, but a renewed trust in the principle that courage and truth could overcome even the darkest moments. The Navy SEAL and his dog remained an important presence, not just as a reminder of that night's rescue, but as symbols of vigilance and loyalty. Their intervention had been decisive, and in the months that followed, their role became a source of inspiration for the woman and for others who heard her story. Communities began to recognize the extraordinary actions that had turned the tide, emphasizing that everyday heroes often operate quietly, unseen, but with profound impact. The dog, once a silent guardian, became emblematic of instinct, awareness, and the bond between human and animal that can literally save a life. Public attention continued to highlight the importance of accountability in law enforcement. The department involved was forced to implement reforms, reassess training programs, and review internal oversight procedures. The story became a case study in the consequences of unchecked authority, demonstrating how courage and vigilance can not only protect individuals but transform institutional culture. For the woman, her experience became more than survival. It became advocacy, a voice for those who might otherwise remain unheard, and a reminder that courage often comes from standing firm in the face of overwhelming danger. Healing, she discovered, wasn't just about recovering from the terror of that night. It was about reclaiming agency and power that had been threatened. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories, small, ordinary moments that underscored her resilience and strength. And while the forest still held memories of fear and near death, it also held a story of triumph, intervention, and justice that could never be erased. The aftermath was not only a personal journey, but a powerful lesson. Survival is possible, and courage can ripple outward, inspiring change and hope long after the immediate danger has passed. As the dust settled on the chaos of that night and the courtroom drama concluded, a clear message emerged, not just for the guilty officers, but for anyone who believes that power grants impunity. The woods that had witnessed an attempted burial became a symbol of accountability, a silent reminder that no act of corruption can remain hidden forever. The Navy SEAL and his dog had proven that vigilance and courage could intervene where the system seemed to fail, and the woman's survival illustrated that even in the darkest moments, hope and preparedness can turn the tide against overwhelming odds. The story serves as a warning to those who abuse authority. Arrogance and confidence are fragile when measured against truth, evidence, and determination. Every act leaves traces, and those who assume they are untouchable often fail to consider the unseen observers, the ones trained to notice patterns, anticipate danger, and intervene with precision. The officers' misjudgment, born from hubris, had placed them in the very situation they sought to control, exposing a harsh reality. Corruption eventually meets resistance, and the consequences can be swift and irrevocable. For the audience, this tale is more than suspense or drama. It's a lesson in ethics, courage, and the importance of standing against wrongdoing. It reminds us that safety and justice do not come automatically, but are defended through vigilance, action, and sometimes extraordinary intervention. The partnership between the seal and his dog emphasizes the value of teamwork, instinct, and trust, showing that heroes can appear in unexpected forms and at critical moments. It also underscores that even when situations seem hopeless, preparedness and awareness can save lives. In closing, remember this: authority can be misused, danger can lurk behind familiar uniforms, and corruption can spread quietly. But courage, awareness, and integrity remain powerful forces that cannot be buried. Share this story to inspire vigilance and justice, comment below to honor resilience and bravery, and subscribe to Swift Tale to continue exploring stories where ordinary circumstances collide with extraordinary courage. The night in the woods may have ended, but the lesson endures. Never underestimate the power of observation, the reach of truth, and the unwavering force of those who refuse to look away. If this story inspired you, reminded you of the importance of courage, or simply gripped you with suspense, there's a way to honor it, like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear that justice can prevail. Subscribe to Swift Tale to follow more stories where the ordinary collides with the extraordinary. And comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in her place? How would you have reacted if you were the watcher in the shadows? Your voice adds to the story, your engagement amplifies awareness, and your presence ensures that tales of courage continue to reach those who need them most. Above all, remember this: darkness can be deceptive, power can be misused, and danger can appear where least expected. But courage, training, and vigilance, sometimes in the form of a silent watcher and a faithful companion, can turn the tide. Tonight, the wronged were protected, and the guilty faced exposure. And that is the power of paying attention, the strength of intervention, and the lesson that stories like this are meant to teach. Justice may not always come immediately, but it finds a way, often through those who refuse